In today's video, we're looking at the 4070 Ti Super up against the RTX 4090, but that's kind of a weird comparison to be looking at when you think about how much these cost, and there's other GPUs between them in the product stack. So why am I talking about these two GPUs today? Well, I was thinking to myself about, okay, if you're gonna be building a high-end PC, but you're also somewhat value conscious, where do you end up in the product stack? Now, one option is to look at AMD GPUs if you're not that interested in the ray tracing feature set and things like that, but let's say you are. So if you're going the Nvidia route, you're going fairly high end, where does it actually make sense to stop? So I think the 4070 Super is the first higher end. I know that'd probably be kind of upper mid-range these days, even though it's $600 for Nvidia GPUs, where I think the heavy ray tracing feature set starts to make sense, but it only has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, that doesn't usually matter, but if you're chasing a pretty high-end build and you're trying to run things like the super heavy-duty, like full ray tracing, path tracing type experiences, especially with frame generation on, which also uses more VRAM, and maybe you're using DLSS performance to play on a 4K screen, well, then you can sometimes go beyond 12 gigabytes of VRAM usage, causing a pretty large difference between the 4070 Super and the 4070 Ti Super. To be clear, it's not usually a 44% difference between these GPUs. Sometimes it's only 10 or 15% difference. But again, there is that 12 gigabyte VRAM issue. So let's say you don't want to deal with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM, that's a concern to you, but you don't want to consider the AMD alternatives, you want the heavy ray tracing features. Well, that leaves the next card up the product stack that gives you a lot of performance, but also 16 gigabytes of VRAM as the 4070 Ti Super. But what about the 4080 Super? Well, I've already done a comparison of the 4070 Ti Super against the 4080 Super, and the interesting thing there is it's 10 to 15% kind of performance difference on these GPUs. It's not a crazy different experience. So while it is costing an extra $200, so if you're somewhat value conscious, you might not want to go with the 4080 Super over the 4070 Ti Super. Like I said, it's not worlds apart. You're not a completely different class of experience that you're having in these games. Whereas what we're looking at today is what about the 4070 Ti Super against the 4090, your next step up? Well, price points on these things are starting to really scale like crazy. So, the 4070 Super, which had 12 gigabytes of VRAM, was a little under $600. If we move up to the 4070 Ti Super, because we want that 16 gigabytes of VRAM, we're now up to nearly $800. You're paying a lot to get that VRAM, security. But then, like I said, the 4080 Super doesn't give you any more VRAM, doesn't give you any new feature set, gives you a bit more performance, but you're up around $1,000 now, so maybe you want to save the money on that. But then the step up to the 4090 is kind of crazy. You're talking $1,700 plus, and you're also hearing my kids making loud steps upstairs. That's how we roll on the channel. Just deal with it. Anyway. So there's a big price difference here. If you're looking at the, maybe the 4070 Ti Super at $790 is good enough. Do I want to go up to $1,720 for a 4090? That's more than doubling the price. That is 2.177 times the price in order to make that step up, which is where now we can look at the gaming performance differences of the 4070 Ti Super versus the 4090. And what I really want us to think about is the 4090 enabling like a completely different class of experience that might be worth that huge extra step up in cost, especially as we're probably within 6 months or so of the 5090 coming out, in which case you might end up with a significantly more powerful graphics card. But would you even need something more powerful than a 4090? Well, take a look at this. So if we start with Cyberpunk's path tracing mode, RT Overdrive at 1440p, if you want to run this at native resolution, if we're talking no upscaling, no frame generation, none of that, not even the 4090 can deliver a 60 FPS experience. It's 48 FPS, but the 4070 Ti Super is only offering 29. So again, you might actually want just to wait for even more powerful hardware than a 4090. But if you're willing to use DLSS quality, and we're kicking on like ray reconstruction here, but no frame generation yet, now the 4070 Ti Super is able to offer almost 60 FPS, at least in the built-in benchmark. Some areas of Phantom Liberty expansion are more demanding. But the 4090 with DLSS quality, even with RT Overdrive here, is delivering 89 frames per second. That's significantly faster, but the 4070 Ti Super was absolutely no slouch here. And if you kick frame generation on, we can see that the 4070 Ti Super is now giving us a 97 frames per second of motion fluidity. It doesn't give you the responsiveness of 97 frames achieved without frame generation, but you're getting a pretty smooth experience here. Now, the 4090 would be giving you 140 frames per second. That's a 44% advantage, but I wouldn't say that you're in completely different worlds in terms of the overall performance here. Now, could be a bit of a difference here, though, if we start talking about 4K resolution. So if you're targeting 4K resolution, RT Overdrive, even going all the way down to DLSS performance mode, which is a 1080p internal resolution before it's upscaled, the 4070 Ti Super is hitting 47 frames per second. Not amazing, whereas the 4090 is well past your 60 FPS barrier, hitting 72 average. So pretty different experience. Now, also, if you kick frame generation on, frame generation struggles a lot more when you're coming from a lower base frame rate. And here we're seeing it only gets the 4070 Ti Super up to a 60 FPS experience using frame generation, which honestly isn't great in terms of PC latency or image quality. Whereas the 4090 is delivering 111 frames per second here. So significantly better 4K path tracing experience on the 4090. Now, what about our other big, path tracing focused kind of game? Well, here we have Alan Wake 2, and at 1440p high settings plus the RT high settings, but using DLSS quality, we see the 4090 delivers 86 frames per second. The 4070 Ti Super is no slouch, though, at 58 FPS, which in this style of game is actually kind of plenty, I would argue, and we haven't even kicked on frame generation yet. If we kick on frame generation, the 4070 Ti Super is hitting 95 frames per second. The 4090 is hitting 138, so significantly better, but they're both honestly offering a very fluid experience. Again, the frame generation not giving you that increased responsiveness. The responsiveness will feel more like you were back at about 50 or 60 FPS on the 4070 Ti Super, but still a very fluid experience and good enough for this kind of game. Now, again, you also just don't really need to be using the heavy-duty path tracing features, in which case a game like Alan Wake 2 at 1440p high with no upscaling is delivering 74 FPS on the 4070 Ti Super and 102 on the 4090. That's a 38% advantage to the 4090. So, good experience on both at 1440p if you're not planning on using those path tracing experiences. If you move up to 4K resolution, only the 4090 is able to deliver 62 FPS, over 60 FPS average here without any upscaling, and the 4070 Ti Super is hitting 42 FPS. But to be honest, 4K resolution in the most graphically demanding new games without upscaling is probably being a little bit stubborn. If you kick on DLSS, at least to the quality setting, things still look great. And now you're getting over 60 FPS on the 4070 Ti Super, and you're getting 98 frames per second on the 4090. So the 4090 is certainly delivering a better experience, but both GPUs are delivering a very good-looking experience here that's also running very smooth, and we haven't even kicked on frame generation yet. But another thing we could look at is what if we wanted to do the path tracing mode at 4K resolution. So if we do that, if we go to high settings plus RT high, even DLSS performance only gets the 4090 over 60 FPS to 68, whereas the 4070 Ti Super is hitting 44. So definitely playable, but not amazing. And if we kick frame generation on, again, the 4070 Ti Super is coming from a fairly low base frame rate for enabling frame generation, only getting 69 FPS average after frame generation is enabled, which gives you the fluidity and kind of responsiveness. The average PC latency here actually looks pretty bad for the 4070 Ti Super, and significantly better on the 4090 for that average PC latency. So I'd say a much better experience for 4K path tracing on the 4090. Now, Not every game's ray tracing features are going to be as demanding as those kind of NVIDIA-sponsored full ray tracing or path tracing, whatever you want to call it, showcases. Games like Avatar look great and are more of a console-focused ray tracing, which I think most third-party developers would be going for unless sponsored by NVIDIA. And here, without upscaling, both GPUs are doing great, 72 versus 114, so certainly a lot faster on the 4090, but doing well on both. And if you're willing to use DLSS quality, now the 4070 Ti Super is hitting over 100 FPS, getting 108 FPS average, and I'm just using the most demanding section of the benchmark here. Many areas of the game and even the benchmark are actually easier to run than this, and the 4090 is hitting 156 FPS. So both GPUs are really kind of crushing Avatar here, especially if you're willing to go to DLSS quality at 1440p. You could also just turn down to high settings instead of using upscaling, which at 1440p, you might prefer doing. And here the game still looks great, and you're getting 99 FPS on the 4070 Ti Super and 148 FPS on the 4090. Again, definitely a better experience on the 4090, but I don't think anybody's going to really be complaining about 99 frames per second with no upscaling at high settings on the 4070 Ti Super. So really getting a pretty good experience. If you move up to 4K resolution, though, at ultra settings and you don't want to upscale, the 4090 is the only GPU that's going to get you over 60 FPS in the demanding areas of this game. Here we're seeing it hit 64, which gives it a 60% advantage over the 40 FPS that we're getting from the 4070 Ti Super. So definitely a much improved experience using the 4090 at 4K native resolution here. But again, in heavy games like this, I think going down to DLSS quality makes a huge amount of sense. And then the 4070 Ti Super is able to deliver over 60 FPS, averaging 65. Now the 4090 is going to get you 102 frames per second. But again, if you have an over 60 FPS baseline, you would be able to then, try out some, frame generation features. This game does feature FSR3's frame generation rather than NVIDIA's frame generation, but still something you could enable and get a very, fluid experience. At 4K high settings, you can actually run the game natively at almost 60 FPS on the 4070 Ti Super, whereas the 4090 is able to deliver a native 4K resolution at 88 frames per second here. So if you're totally against upscaling, which I'm not sure why you're targeting the NVIDIA lineup if you're not going to use DLSS, to be honest, it's one of the big features, especially at 4K resolution, but hey, you can certainly do it here without it. But if you are willing to use DLSS quality at 4K high settings, we're now getting a very good experience on both GPUs. The 4070 Ti Super delivering 86 frames per second here without any frame generation, and the 4090 delivering 132 frames per second here, again using DLSS quality and reducing down to the high settings. So especially if you're willing, like I said, to tweak things down just a little bit, the 4070 Ti Super is still doing great at 4K. What about big Unreal Engine 5 games? Well, Lords of the Fallen is one of the most demanding Unreal Engine 5 games I've tested so far. And at 1440p Ultra, the 4070 Ti Super is good for over 60 FPS here, averaging 62, whereas the 4090 is good for 87. So definitely a improved experience there, but both GPUs giving you a very good experience. And we haven't yet turned down any settings or used any upscaling. If we do use DLSS quality, the 4070 Ti Super is now at 93 FPS average in the same scene, whereas the 4090 is hitting 120. The 4090 here is probably getting held a little bit back by just engine limitations on the CPU and traversal and things like that, especially in the 1% lows as we get some traversal stutter in Unreal Engine 5. But anyway, you're getting a very high refresh rate experience on both GPUs there. But what if we move up to 4K resolution? Well, 4K Ultra in this game, not even the 4090 can give you 60 frames per second, but Unreal Engine 5 is really not designed to run at a native 4K resolution. This engine is really designed around upscaling, especially when chasing after high resolution outputs like 4K. So here, yeah, definitely a much better experience on the 4090, probably not how you'll want to run it on either GPU. And here, if you kick on DLSS quality, the 4070 Ti Super jumps all the way to 61 FPS average now at 4K Ultra with DLSS quality. The game still looks excellent, and you're getting a very fluid experience. And the 4090 is delivering 88 frames per second, so certainly a higher refresh rate experience. But again, you're not getting a terrible experience in the 4070 Ti Super, but yeah, the 4K resolution gaming is certainly a better experience on the 4090. Now, not every Unreal Engine 5 game is as demanding as Lords of the Fallen. If we take a look at RoboCop Rogue City, 1440p epic settings, which is what it calls its highest preset, we see the 4070 Ti Super delivering 79 frames per second and the 4090 giving us 41% better a result at 111 frames per second. So both GPUs giving great results here at 1440p epic settings. If you move up to 4K resolution, once again, only the 4090 is going to break 60 FPS here, giving us 67 FPS average, whereas the 4070 Ti Super is giving us 43. So again, if you're looking at gaming at maxed out native resolution 4K gaming, only the 4090s, really reasonable for that. But again, I'm not sure those are the settings you'd really be chasing even on a 4090. You'd probably want to kick on DLSS quality if you're in Unreal Engine 5 at 4K resolution. And if you do that, the 4070 Ti Super is now at 68 FPS average, giving a very nice smooth experience. And the 4090 is almost hitting 100 FPS at 98 FPS average in the scene, giving us a 44% advantage for the 4090 over the 4070 Ti Super in this test. So, another option is to kick on frame generation, and once you have that baseline frame rate near 60 frames per second or over, it gives you a pretty great experience here with the 4070 Ti Super now giving you 93 frames of motion fluidity. Keep in mind, not that level of responsiveness as frame generation goes, and the 4090 at 134 FPS, utilizing frame generation again to achieve that. So both of them giving you a very smooth experience there. Games like Starfield can also be very demanding, but at 1440p Ultra, no upscaling. The game, by the way, defaults to using upscaling. I've turned that off manually for the Ultra settings here when testing it. Sorry for all the stomping upstairs from my kids, guys. Anyway. The 4070 Ti Super here giving a nice smooth 79 FPS, and the 4090 giving you 109 frames per second. And if we go ahead and move up to 4K resolution, the 4070 Ti Super is not quite good for 60 FPS. We're hitting 53, and the 4090 is hitting 79, which is a 49% advantage. But again, pretty good experience on both. But again, especially on the 4070 Ti Super, you would probably want to enable upscaling, or you could turn down settings, or you could do both. So what I ended up testing out here is going to be what if you kicked on DLSS quality. If you kick on DLSS quality, the 4070 Ti Super is now good for 72 frames per second, smooth experience, and the 4090 is good for 104 frames per second, making it 44% faster in this test than the 4070 Ti Super. And honestly, it's approaching that kind of a little over 100 FPS average, which in these city areas, you start to run into CPU limitations in Starfield anyway if you try to go past that, unless you enable frame generation. If we kick on frame generation, you don't get CPU limited, and we can push the 4090 up to 144 frames per second and the 4070 Ti Super to 99. So again, DLSS quality and frame generation, you're getting a very smooth gaming experience on the 4070 Ti Super, even on the 4K display. So again, 4090 is definitely better, but it's not like you're getting a bad experience on the 4070 Ti Super. And not every game needs to be as demanding as these. Wait, are you seeing the 4070 Ti Super matching the performance of the 4090 in Baldur's Gate 3 at 1440p Ultra? Yeah, because this is what you would call being CPU limited. Notice we're only getting the 4090 up to 60-something% utilization because the CPU ends up being the bottleneck in Baldur's Gate 3, at least once you're in the bigger city areas. If we move up to 4K Ultra, that puts an additional load on the GPU and brings the 4070 Ti Super under the limit that the CPU could reach. And so now we're able to get that separation, showing the 4090 offering 118 FPS, which is 46% better than what we're getting from the 4070 Ti Super's 81 FPS average. So again, at 4K Ultra, we do see the separation between the GPUs. We were just CPU limited at 1440p resolution. If we take a look at an RE Engine game, like maybe Resident Evil 4 Remake at 1440p max settings, which does include some limited ray tracing effects, we can see both GPUs do absolutely great. 192 FPS versus 137. Yeah, the 4090 is 40% faster, but it's not like you're getting anywhere near a bad experience on the 4070 Ti Super, and this isn't even using any upscaling. If we go ahead and take a look at 4K maxed out resolution and settings, no upscaling, native 4K, we're seeing the 4090 delivering a massive 130 frames per second, but it's not like the 4070 Ti Super is performing badly at 81 FPS. And again, you could slightly turn down settings. For example, the ray tracing effects in this game are really kind of grainy reflections that honestly I turned off when playing on a 4090 because I just didn't like how they looked. Also, you might be playing more competitive titles or multiplayer titles where you would turn down settings anyway. If you do that, both GPUs are going to give you crazy high frame rates, and if you're playing at low resolutions like 1080p, chasing like a 500 hertz display or something like that, sometimes you'll end up CPU limited, especially in the 1% lows like we're seeing here, where both GPUs are 300, 400 FPS in the averages and around 200 in the 1% lows. If you move to 1440p resolution, we get a bit more separation in the 1% lows. But the averages are 254 versus 350. It's like, okay, guys, if you can't get the kill at these kinds of frame rates, it might be a skill issue. I hate to tell you that. You might not be able to blame the hardware. I guess you could still blame lag. You'd be like, I had a bad connection to the server. Anyway, I'm sure you'll find some way to blame something other than your own skill. But 4K basic settings here, we're seeing 157 FPS versus 236. And honestly, at 4K resolution in a multiplayer game, you would probably want to turn on DLSS. Maybe even the performance mode DLSS, and that would boost frame rates a bunch again. Anyway, so yeah, overall, what do I have to say about all of this? Okay, so in other words, back to the original question, is it worth spending, over double the money to get the 4090 when you could just buy a 4070 Ti Super? And I think the answer to that is obviously the 4090 is a lot better. So if that amount of money difference doesn't really matter to you, if an extra $1,000 is just like, whatever, I have it, it doesn't make any real difference in my life, this is my hobby and I have lots of money to throw at it, then sure, throw the money at the 4090, but keep in mind that the 5090 is probably 6 months away and is likely gonna be a lot faster for a similar price. So just keep that in mind. But again, if you're like the kind of person where it's like, it's just money and I don't really care, then okay, great, buy yourself the 4090. Now the 4070 Ti Super, for people who are a little bit like, yeah, $1,000 matters to me, but I do want a really good gaming experience. Well, I think this video shows that in the vast majority of situations, the 4070 Ti Super delivers an excellent experience. The only exception seems to be 4K resolution, even if you go down to DLSS performance and use frame generation, when you're trying to use RT Overdrive, or in other words, path tracing modes. So if your goal is to play on a 4K screen, the most advanced NVIDIA-sponsored path tracing experiences, really only the 4090 is going to give a great experience for that. The 4080 Super will give a better experience than the 4070 Ti Super does, but still not like absolutely amazing. And we saw that in both Cyberpunk and in Alan Wake 2, where again it's the 4K full-on path tracing mode. It's not unplayable on the 4070 Ti Super, but it's not going to be that kind of high refresh rate, smooth experience that you'd really want. Your frame rates are a bit lower than what I like using frame generation on, so you get a more noticeable, increases to latency and image quality and things like artifacts and things like that. So that's my overall take. If you want the best 4K path tracing experience, the 4090 is really the way to go, or wait for the next generation. Whereas if you're playing on a 1440p screen, yeah, the 4090 is way better. But if $1,000 matters to you, it's not $1,000 better. Anyway, that's my take on the situation. Hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting. Hopefully you didn't get too freaked out by all the stomping upstairs as we filmed. But kids are home for the summer playing around, so that's just how we roll here, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.